Thank you, Nassim. Mansour's convictions and sentence, as well as his dehumanizing detention conditions, represent acts of brutal state repression and grave human rights abuses. UN rights experts, the European Parliament, US Congress members, Nobel Prize winners, well-known authors, prominent intellectuals, and international political figures have all condemned the imprisonment and treatment of Ahmed Mansoor by the UAE, as have the likes of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who continue to advocate and fight on Ahmed's behalf. Despite all of this, though, the UAE has largely remained insulated from meaningful criticism and action by its closest allies in relation to its treatment of Ahmed Mansoor. Over the past few years, UAE rulers have invested considerably in promoting the UAE as an open, tolerant, and rights-respecting country, a strategy that has helped undermine efforts to hold the government accountable for its grave human rights abuses, not just in related to Ahmed Mansoor, but also in Yemen, for example. Instead, the UAE's key allies in relations with countries like the US, the UK, the EU have grown deeper and more extensive. As many of you know, I founded the Free Latifa campaign in 2018. Our campaign was to secure the release of Princess Latifa of Dubai, the daughter of the ruler. Latifa was illegally captured in 2018 after her attempts to flee Dubai failed. She and several other international citizens were kidnapped at gunpoint by the UAE, taken to Dubai, and in the case of Latifa, held hostage ever since, until a few months ago. In 2018, few would listen to our campaign or our calls of the grave abuses of human rights by the UAE on Latifa and the others captured. We filed complaints of such abuses to Latifa with law enforcement bodies, international courts, the UN, and with politicians. Few were interested at that time. It was not until we commenced an international and hopefully successful media campaign to press those commercial interests, to put pressure on the law enforcement bodies, politicians, and the UN to take action, that we saw change. Earlier this year, following our release of videos recorded by Latifa from her jail villa as a hostage about her fears for her life and the conditions she was held in, finally the world and international leaders started to take note, and we saw change. This experience has led me to believe that it is only when we raise Ahmed's plight and the daily horrors he faces in the UAE jails to as many people as possible and as many media as possible around the world, as we did in the case of Latifa, that we will see the appropriate pressure that will force the international community to act and to do more than they are currently doing. It should no longer be acceptable for the likes of former British Prime Minister Theresa May to attend a women's rights conference at the Dubai World Tolerance Summit, whilst Ahmed or any other person is suffering grave human rights abuses in the UAE. To conclude, I would call on the governments of the United States, Britain, France, and other EU countries to publicly and privately call on the UAE authorities to immediately and unconditionally release Ahmed Mansoor and anyone else in the UAE detained for exercising their basic right of freedom of speech. I would call on those same governments to contest the UAE's attempts and highlight the hypocrisy when they try to whitewash their human rights abuses by presenting themselves as a tolerant, progressive, and rights-respecting country, of which they are not. Thank you very much.